If I could have your attention, please. We do have a few seats up front here if people are looking for a seat. My name is Tom Duesterberg. I'm the director of the Manufacturing and Society program here at the Aspen Institute. I want to welcome you here today. I want to first thank my sponsors whose support makes this program and other programs possible. These include the Apollo Group, Bison Gear and Engineering, Emerson Electric, Harris Corporation, Madison Capital Partners, the Manufacturers Alliance for Productivity and Innovation, the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Science Foundation, Parker Hannifin Corporation, Toyota Motor of North America, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and William Buttinger. Today we're going to explore how the recent growth in domestic supplies of energy, especially natural gas, and lower prices are, along with other changes in the competitiveness of U.S. industry, producing a sea change in the manufacturing sector in the United States. The quote-unquote other factors that we should mention are steady growth in productivity, superior technology and innovation, attention to controlling costs, and changes in the global terms of trade. But the energy boom is an extra wind at the back of U.S. manufacturing. U.S. manufacturing uses about 1/3 of all the energy consumed in the United States. Lower prices for natural gas, which, as you all know, is priced regionally and not at the international level, and abundant supplies domestically both provide both opportunities to produce oil and gas and give a huge cost advantage to U.S. industry when compared to global competitors. Average prices of natural gas in the United States are less than half those in Europe and about 1/3 those in Asia. The advantage is especially acute for our chemicals industry, which uses more natural gas than global competitors as a feedstock. Some 80% or so of the feedstock in U.S. chemicals is natural gas, compared to, say, 2/3 oil in Europe and Asia. And hence it has a double benefit. The substitution of natural gas for other fossil fuels, along with the constant improvement in the efficiencies of production in U.S. manufacturing, is also good for sustainability. U.S. manufacturing has reduced its use of energy per dollar of output by 36% since 1998, almost double the 20% in the overall economy. We will explore today the impacts on manufacturing and sustainability of the trends in more detail with our three distinguished panelists, each of whose organizations have recently released important new studies. Lest you think that some of their projections are exaggerated, I would cite a June 2012 study by Citigroup, which projected the following changes in U.S. growth solely as a result of the energy boom. They estimate that by 2020, between U.S. GDP would be 2 to 3% higher on an annual basis, or additional output of $370 to $620 billion per year. It would create 2.7 to 3.6 million jobs, including 1.1 million in manufacturing and 600,000 oil and gas production. And finally, reduce the trade deficit by 1.2 to 2.4% of GDP. So our panelists, I'll give a brief introduction in alphabetical order, starting with Congressman Cal Dooley, who's the president and CEO of the American Chemistry Council, where he has been since 2008. Previously, he was the president and CEO of the Grocery Manufacturers Association. He served in the U.S. Congress representing Northern California between 1991 and 2004, where he was a leader in promoting a pro-trade agenda and was instrumental in securing passage of the Trade Promotion Authority. Next, Tom Peterson is the founder, president, chief executive officer of the Center for Climate Strategies, which was founded in 2004 to assist governments and stakeholders with comprehensive development and implementation of economic, energy, and environmental strategies. He works not only as an advisor in the United States, especially to state governments, but also several provinces in China and regions in Mexico. Tom also is an adjunct professor and teaching fellow at the Center for Advanced Governmental Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Finally, Hal Sirkin is the former global leader of the Boston Consulting Group's operations, IT, and e-commerce practices. He's had extensive experience across a wide range of topics and industries in all regions at a global level. Notably, he's the co-author of the U.S. Manufacturing Renaissance, How Shifting Global Economics Are Creating an American Comeback. There's a flyer in your package. This is available for download free of charge through Amazon and other places. So I've asked each of our panelists to take a few minutes at the start here to give an overview of their recent studies and set the stage for the discussion which we will have. We'll start with Congressman Dooley.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom, and I'm delighted to be joining all of you. Tom did mention I joined the American Chemistry Council in 2008. I've been there for 4 years, and I kind of put, what we're you're addressing now and the changing dynamic in the chemical industry in that context of 4 years. When I took over, I'd be going around and meeting with the CEOs of various chemical companies. They're headquartered and located here in the United States, and not one of them were talking about making major new investments here in the United States. And now, 4 years hence, every CEO that I'm talking to that is representing a chemical company in the United States, not only in the United States, but globally, whether it's in Western Europe, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in India, are talking about making major new investments in chemical manufacturing in the United States. And there's only one reason for that. It's almost all predicated on the advancements in technology that are allowing us to capitalize on the domestic resource we have in natural gas, primarily from unconventional sources. And if we look at that period, really from the 1999 to 2009, our industry was in a decline. We lost almost 120 to 130,000 jobs in our industry. It was almost 25% of our entire workforce. And the reason for that was because of the high volatility in natural gas prices and relatively high natural gas prices. With Katrina, after Katrina, they spiked up to even $14, $15. And why that is so important is because in the United States, and Tom mentioned this, is that we use natural gas as our feedstock. We're one of the most energy-intensive industries, so natural gas and energy is important to us, but it's even more important to us because of the feedstock. So like flour is to bakery, natural gas is to the chemical industry. And when you look at the fact that the U.S., we have about 85% of our chemicals are produced with natural gas as a feedstock versus globally, it's about 70% or 66%, as Tom alluded to, which is naphtha-based, which is oil, is that we have historically been at a competitive equilibrium when you had about a 1-to-7 ratio. You would be indifferent to whether you were sourcing naphtha, oil-based, or natural gas. And so you had $4 natural gas, $28 barrel oil. And now we're looking at maybe a little less than $4 natural gas, and we're looking at 90 plus, give or take, a barrel of oil. And so we look out to the future, and we think we're going to see a sustained period of enhanced competitiveness globally. And in fact, we have gone from that high-cost producer internationally of chemicals to now we are, if not the lowest, close to the lowest cost producer of chemicals internationally. And so when we have done some of our recent studies in terms of what is this going to mean for increased investment, we did one 2 years ago where we kind of calculated and built it upon an assumption of a 25% increase in natural gas and natural gas liquids. Our calculation at that time, it would result into about a $30 billion or 16. Let me get my figures right here. About a $16 billion increase in investment, capital investment in our industry. that would generate about, what we thought, about 400,000 jobs, only about 17,000 in the chemical industry because we're not employee intensive, we're capital intensive, but would manifest itself in about 16 billion and then about a $400,000 jobs. We were woefully underestimating than what we found in the 2 years, because we keep a running total of publicly announced new investments in chemicals and manufacturing. We're already 40 billion to 40 billion plus. And then we did another study that we just released just a month or so ago, where we went beyond just the chemical industry and we looked at some of our customers. Because the chemical industry, where we're in the value chain, we sell to the auto industry, we sell to the construction industry. We're kind of, one of those that is upstream, and so our customers are the ones that are more consumer facing. And when we did this study in terms of, again, looking at even a 30% increase in ethane, what would this mean to the broader manufacturing sector there? Our calculations was it was upwards of 72 to 75 billion in new capital investment that would generate about over almost 662,000 jobs. And so this is really, almost again can almost entirely be attributed to natural gas. And so when we talk about what we're seeing as a new golden age in chemical manufacturing, because where we're at in that supply chain, when we're selling to auto manufacturers, it has a real potential to contribute to not only the enhanced competitiveness that we're experiencing, but also to our customer base, which pretends and gives us an opportunity to see a resurgence in manufacturing in the United States. And we're confident that this is going to occur over the next decade.
Thanks, Cal. I think we'll go to Tom next.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for having me here. So when we had lunch the other day, you told me you were interested in the environmental perspective on all these things. And when I talk about climate change from that perspective, it reminds me a little bit, 150 years ago when we were looking at this thing called radiation, it was understood as an image processing issue, basically. And then, of course, as scientists look a little bit more deeply into it, they learn more about the atom than we ever dreamed was possible, and it changed the course of human history. And I think climate change is a little bit like that. It's one of these can opener things that's enabling us to get a better appreciation for the ties between our economy, our energy systems, and our environment than we otherwise might. And those ties are fundamental. Manufacturing is really very much in the middle of all that. But I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think, if you fast forward 150 years from now, that long since we would have incorporated these ties in the DNA of our economy and our culture, because they are so strong, they're so meaningful. The issue of climate change is really a part of that, but it's really calling the question on how these things all connect together. Manufacturing really finds itself, I think, in three different dimensions of the climate change issue. The first is, of course, it's a major national consumer of energy. It's also, as a consequence, one of the major national reducers of carbon dioxide emissions, and it has done a tremendous amount just through energy intensity reductions in the last 2 decades. So it has a primary role. But then there's a very important secondary role, which is enabling the rest of the economy to move forward with new products and services and technologies that enable it to capture these emerging global trends, which are resident here in the United States, towards greater security and sustainability in policies and in markets. And we see this not only in the United States, this is a major issue in China where we're working, and the manufacturing sector really plays this enormous enabling role in that. And the third area is that manufacturing itself faces climate change risks, the changes that we call now the new normal, that are impacting facilities, operations, everywhere, and calling the question of how to respond to those risks and do that in a way that allows the continuity of operations, but also potentially can expand competitiveness as well as community sustainability. So these things are really coming together, and manufacturing plays a very central role. I don't think it has occupied nearly the attention that it needs in terms of policy on climate change, and I can talk a little bit more about that as we go forward and what that might mean at the federal and then the subnational level. We've done a couple studies here that relate to this that I'd be happy to comment on today. The first is something we call the Security Investment Project, which is looking at how do you get economic, energy, and environmental security on the same page, and then actually mobilize investment to actions that engineer a set of outcomes that are simultaneously net positive in all these areas. That's a fancy way of saying, how do you do smart stuff all at the same time and make sure that a check flows to make that happen? And by the way, how much has already happened? So what we've documented is that we've seen very major shifts in our emissions trajectories going forward, in our energy trajectories going forward here in the United States, and they're not an accident. It's not just the economy. It's not just natural gas. Natural gas plays a key role. The dominant role, interestingly, over the last 5 to 7 years has been policy, the movement towards renewable and low-emitting sources of energy, lower energy intensity approaches through efficiency and conservation, transportation improvements, and waste reduction, waste management, recycling, a set of activities that sound pretty much bread and butter, but have been hammered out over a long time to deliver multiple benefits. It turns out they've closed this emissions gap we have in the United States when you look out to 2020, about 70% in comparison to this 1990 goal level that's roughly what the president has articulated, and we see the rest of the world chasing. And it turns out there's more where that came from. There's a set of top activities in every sector that will enable us to do more of the things that help us get energy, economy, and environment on the same page. And it certainly appears that you can formulate an agenda there that is very good for the production side of the United States economy. Bigger story, and I'd love to talk more about what that means. Earlier this year, we released a report that was done on behalf of the governors of Washington, California, and Oregon, and then the Premier of British Columbia, that is called the West Coast Clean Economy Report. And this was really asking the question, what could those jurisdictions do by themselves and with each other to capture and enhance this growing global economy that some people call green? I like to refer to it as more sustainable and secure, but there's definitely a shift globally. How do you translate that into activities here that will capture those markets and generate a flow of dollar bills and job creation back at the local area? And so we've identified those market segments, the growth profile, in a set of very specific policy actions that could actually translate into market capture and enhancement. And this is a part of the global race that we now see underway. And again, working in China in particular, we can comment pretty specifically on how that's emerging, and it is for real. The final study is really more a guidebook. It's a how-to guide on the issue of resilience, climate change adaptation, either for facilities or jurisdictions, how to understand risk, how to actually respond to it in ways that also get other things on the same page, like economic expansion. And so I'd be happy to share any or all of the further details on them. But really, what came out of the Security Investment Project paper that may be of particular interest here was the notion that we do have a renaissance underway that is very much at least partly attributable to natural gas, and there's an energy renaissance underway in the United States. But there's a broader renaissance that's underway worldwide and here in the United States, and it is about these policies and markets that are bending in more sustainable and secure directions. Natural gas is a part of it, but again, a much bigger picture, and we can see a much bigger opportunity set for our production sector to be actually able to play in that and enhance that. And one of the final things we did was take a careful look at what that might mean for federal policy here in the next couple of years, given that we've seen a few changes in that department as well. And I'd be happy to sort of walk through what precipitates out of that in terms of some very targeted federal actions that might make sense and we might hear more about this next couple of years.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Great.
Hal.
Well, I'm Hal Sirkin. I work for the Boston Consulting Group, and as part of our efforts to make sure that we understand and communicate changes in global activity, changes in global trends, changes in global competitiveness, we've spent the last 2 years looking from a manufacturing perspective at how global economies compete in manufacturing. This is something that we self-fund. We do not charge for it. We do not take any money for it, so we are independent on this. And we, as part of that, of course, started to look at the natural gas phenomenon and what's taking place there. And we look at it from an interesting perspective. We look at it from what this means for the overall world economy and, of course, me being an American, take an American perspective on it. We look at it as a gift, this low natural gas cost. We have a lot of it, and it's relatively low cost, assuming that there aren't significant environmental issues with it. It is a great opportunity. As one of my colleagues said, God blessed America again, and it certainly did. If you look at what we pay for natural gas now versus the world economies, we're paying 30 to 50% of what would be a world rate, and as we all know, because of the transportation costs, you don't just ship it around, so that can be sustainable if we do it right. And because of that, we're paying also electricity rates that are 40 to 65% of world rates. Now, if you think about global competitiveness and the importance of energy and all of that, that's a pretty clear trend, so we clearly decided to dig deep on it. We think there's really 5 areas beyond that where that it makes a huge difference and will generate more manufacturing opportunities for the U.S. Some of it has already been talked about, but we see a 50% advantage for a lot of manufacturers in terms of the primary feedstock. So whether it's chemicals or fertilizer manufacturing, this is a huge opportunity for those businesses. And as you pointed out, those businesses are coming back to the U.S. I had an opportunity to interview the CEO of DuPont just a few weeks ago, and it's very clear that she believes it. Yep. And is putting her money and the shareholders' money with it. So we think this is a pretty good opportunity. It shows up in the aspects in terms of polyethylene basic plastic resins, and that's another area where it will create jobs, and that's the beginning of the second order effects. It's even possible that it changes the nature of the plastics industry. If you think about all those plastic toys you buy from China, we're trying to sort out now, and we don't know what the economics look like, as to whether it actually makes sense to make those plastic toys in the U.S. rather than in China. And I think that would be a revolutionary change if that could happen. So stay tuned. We'll give you more information on that as we learn about it. It also has huge value for high energy-intensive businesses, and that makes the U.S. far more competitive in those. And finally, for the average consumer, or for that matter, the average business, you can see a 1 or 2% cost reduction relative to world costs, even if they're not energy intensive as a business. And that's a huge difference on the world stage. So from our perspective, it's an incredible gift. It makes U.S. manufacturing more competitive. It will generate a lot of demand. And it will also allow us to do more exporting. And with our trade deficit, that becomes an important issue. You're not going to ship natural gas, but you may ship products that are made from natural gas because the economics of shifting are different. And what we're seeing at the same time is massive announcements, investments, a lot of ground being broken, and a lot of other things. So there's a substantial opportunity to drive the American economy using this. And it is a gift. And I think it's all of us as stewards of the country, as citizens, to make sure we use it wisely.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to lead a short discussion here, and in 15 minutes or so, we'll turn it over to the audience for questions. I wanted to start by asking if any of the panelists would like to comment on this. We've all given a more or less favorable, optimistic look at the future. What sorts of things might happen that could interrupt this positive story? And are they realistic, or is this an inevitable train running down the track that can't be stopped? Cal?
Well, being a former member of Congress, and with an accent on former, I think that really when you look at the fundamentals in terms of the gift is Hal referred to it in terms of this tremendous supply. We're in a position where I am confident that we'll have a regulatory approach to the production of natural gas that appropriately addresses the environmental and safety issues in a manner that will allow us to capitalize on that. And so I'm not concerned in terms of a regulatory impediment on the production side of natural gas to the degree that I might have been a few years ago. I think we're over that tipping point where there's great vulnerability. I would say that when you look at these massive investments that our industry and other manufacturing sectors are looking at, the certainty in terms of policies that are important. And so there is one issue in particular in terms of something that's important to our sector is accelerated depreciation. And so you have a lot of talk about, closing what would say loopholes or tax preferences. For the U.S. to truly capitalize on the investment opportunities that natural gas provides us, preserving some of these tax policies would be important. That I wouldn't say it would impede the eventual flow of capital, but it would certainly delay some of the decisions, which I think would be unfortunate. Because we have a period of time here that we have, we look at, most of our studies look at the U.S. having a sustained competitive advantage for probably at least 10 to 20 years, just because of the infrastructure we have in place to transport gas. But other countries have this resource as well, and so we need to capitalize on this in the shortest term as possible.
Hal, you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think the likely outcome is that this is a train that's rolling down the tracks, and in spite of what government would do, it probably would continue rolling down the tracks. I think it is somewhat inevitable. There are a few things that could pop up that might make a change, right? If we decided for some reason that this was a massive polluter for some reason, and the evidence isn't there to show that yet, but if that was the case, that could be a real issue. If the fracking polluted our water supplies, that would be a real question, and I think people would stop and try to rethink that. Again, there's no real evidence to say that that's going on, but that could happen. And I guess it could be that, well, we all see the optimistic projections, not about the cost, but about the supply base. I'm not sure we know what's really been discovered and what hasn't been discovered yet. So, we can see our way for the first 10 years for competitive advantage. Beyond that, of course, it's not clear. But, I think, if I was a betting man on this, I'd be putting a lot of money down.
Okay. Tom, I have a specific question for you. You've put a lot of emphasis on energy security in the work you've done for your various clients and for policymakers. And I want to press you on how natural gas fits into this template. Obviously, the growth in natural gas supplies making the quick and the lower prices are impeding, at least from a purely economic point of view, the faster rollout of renewable energy supplies. On the other hand, the use of natural gas is aiding in the transition, what some call a transition to a less carbon-intensive, domestically self-sufficient economy as well. There are obviously lots of trade-offs here. How do you think about those trade-offs, and do you have any recommendations based on those?
It's a great question, and by the way, not just here. I was in Alberta, Canada a couple months ago, and the Premier was speaking, and really focused on the interest that Canada has in ramping up its production of oil and gas. But the question emerged: what's going to happen to renewables and efficiency? By the way, along the way, are they going to be left by the wayside? Or is there something we have to do here? I really think that's a part of a bigger issue. One of the metrics of energy security that emerges is primary energy diversity. And you can imagine a scenario where this tremendous supply of natural gas, and I agree that the mitigation side of it and the community service side of this is likely to be resolvable to the extent that it isn't already, could concentrate things in a way that reduces primary energy diversity. On the other hand, one of the things we looked at in our work is the question mark of, are we going to try to close this remaining gap on greenhouse gas emissions? And are we going to be able to do that in a way that's good for primary energy diversity and lots of other things at the same time? And when you do a combination of things together, gas continues to grow, gas continues to penetrate, but it's there along with efficiency, renewables, and other forms of low emitting. And so what we've shown, and we've got a wonderful, my favorite graph, in fact, out of the whole paper, shows how primary energy diversity really expands across the board when you do all these things sensibly together. So I don't think there has to be a trade-off, but I do think that the role that carbon plays is actually a helpful one in terms of maintaining and expanding primary energy diversity without the trade-off that you're killing the goose that lays the golden egg here.
Okay. Hal, I have a question for you. There are lots of new energy projects have, especially in the chemicals industry, but also in things like glass, metals, plastics, others have been announced. Hopefully a lot of them will come to fruition. Could you, one doesn't often hear in the conversation how this might help the technology industries. And for instance, the growing use of the cloud and massive expansions of the storage capacity that we have available is all fed by server farms.
Absolutely.
And I've seen numbers as high as 10% of what domestic electricity consumption goes just to server farms. Can you comment on whether or not the technology industry benefits from this this wave of energy?
Yeah, well, I think all industries are going to benefit from this because energy is important to virtually everything we do, whether it's manufacturing, even in the service businesses, in the technology businesses. Anytime you can reduce electricity costs, our economy benefits. Anytime you can reduce natural gas costs, our economy benefits. Anytime you can make the U.S. more productive, our economy benefits. We export more. We create more jobs. It causes growth, and it makes some of the problems we have go away if we can continue to do that. So, when it comes to the use of server farms, that is a big energy user. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I've heard similar numbers to what you said. That would make it more productive. It might make it more that people use the U.S. only because the energy costs are lower and use server farms in the U.S. and transmit them somewhere else. Who knows? But there is an impact that is pervasive. It affects all of us when we now look at our heating bills and we use natural gas or even electricity. We see them go down. And that's a big effect. And it's the same for small business. Small businesses are benefiting greatly because turning the lights on costs money, and that money is now costing a lot less. All these things have major impacts in the economy, and we're just at the beginning of seeing those effects. Because this is still, although it's been around for about 5 years, it's still relatively new, and it's still rolling itself out. And we are, in the middle of the beginning of a renaissance, and hopefully we don't mess it up.
Okay, we talked a lot about the global advantage in the United States resulting from lower energy prices. I have two questions in this regard for anyone who cares to comment. One, are we seeing yet an increase in our exports, things like chemicals, for instance, or plastics? And number two, is this cost advantage likely to persist into the future? I mean, we are not the only ones with shale resources. As Tom knows, China apparently has very big shale resources. I just read an article about Northern Africa the other day. Poland, Mexico, all have huge deposits of natural gas. Is there any evidence that any other part of the world is rapidly moving to exploit these resources and might erode our price advantage anytime soon? Any of you?
Well, I'll just make a few comments on that. I don't think that we're concerned that anytime soon that we're going to see an erosion of our competitive advantage that we have. But inevitably, you're going to see the development of natural gas resources in other parts of the world. Where the United States, though, again, has a relative advantage is on the infrastructure that's already in place that facilitates the distribution of that resource through our pipeline system, that there's a few other countries that have the ability to capitalize on that. You also can look at, even in Europe and Western Europe, is that their land use practices are such and policies that really have significant impediments to developing a shale gas resource there. In the United States, if you look at a lot of our shale deposits, they are actually located higher, or they're easier to access, and so they're cheaper to produce from. And China is kind of interesting. I kind of with some little bit of facetiousness. Look at Sinopec made a $2.5 billion investment in Devon, one of the largest natural gas producers. I refer to this as one of the most expensive internship programs ever, because they are going to school to understand this technology that they want to take back and develop their resources, and so. But that takes time to do that, and so I think we have an opportunity to capitalize on this for a significant period of time.
Yeah, I mean, our perspective is that there's a 10-year advantage, which will put a lot of assets in the ground, which are very helpful because they're hard to move, which will sustain some of the advantage even longer. But it's a 10-year advantage. It could be longer than that, but it's going to take a while for all of this to roll out. And as you say, in Europe. It is difficult for them to do this. They will eventually figure it out because the economics are so strong it will overcome just about everything. But there's a 10-year advantage, and again, I think we need to use that wisely.
Tom, you have any?
Just a quick comment, and that maybe to sort of talk a little bit about China. And China's trying to maintain a high economic growth rate, and that 8%. If they get down to 7.5%, they get worried. And here we are in Europe. Goodness gracious, being able to maintain an economic growth rate like that, among other things, means maintaining an energy supply pattern out in the long haul. That's incredibly challenging, and I think one of the driving interests they have in the reduction in energy intensity and the diversification of energy supplies is the ability to service this growth going forward, and not just for 10 years, but really looking beyond that. So they're in their first 5-year economic cycle right now that has formally included these combined goals of greenhouse gas emissions and economic growth for each of the provinces. And they'll go into a second 5-year plan that will intensify that. And one of the challenges they've got to resolve, which I think is a worldwide challenge, is how are they going to have their cake and eat it too? How are they going to bend down these curves on emissions and bend down the dependencies that they have on any particular source of energy? Because at that rate of growth, they're all relatively problematic. How are they going to do that? And if they find the answer to do that at the same time, that vaults them onto the competitiveness stage in a way that we ought to be paying very keen attention to right now, in my opinion. And we shouldn't be waiting for 2 5-year economic cycles to pass to look beyond just gas to this bigger picture of how you sustain growth in economies. And I think one of the opportunities for American manufacturing is to help understand how these emerging economies or high growth economies can sustain their growth with a different approach to energy. And gas is a part of it, but there's a broader and more diverse set of things they're going to have to do to be able to deal with that. And I think that is a great opportunity that exists now, and there are a lot of ties with policy around that.
Yeah, if I can just say, just as as an industry and as an association, we agree with Tom 100% here. Is that there needs to be a diverse energy portfolio and a comprehensive domestic energy policy is developed in this country, and part of that is we have a vested interest because we use natural gas as a feedstock, but we're also, if you look at a solar cell, it's basically chemicals. If you look at a lot of the turbines, they're made out of composites that are basically chemicals and in their structure there. And if you look at energy efficiency, if you look at all the insulations and the coatings and the films that are increasing building efficiencies, those are all our products. And so, we feel very, very strongly that you need to have that diverse energy portfolio, and you have to have an energy policy, a domestic energy policy that is also incentivizing efficiency to make sure that we aren't falling behind the curve in terms of our competitiveness, in terms of the innovation and development of technologies in these alternatives, renewables, and efficiency.
Okay, we're going to go to the audience in just a second, but have you seen any evidence yet that exports from energy-intensive industries are picking up because of this cost advantage?
Yeah, we have done some work on that, and we track that annually. It's because of the recession and coming out of the recession, some of those numbers are hard to normalize. But we saw, I think just last year we saw a 17% increase in chemical exports out of the United States, and we are one of the largest exporting industries in the country. Just anecdotally, I was in Louisiana in the port of New Orleans about a year ago. They saw at that point in time a year-over-year increase in exports out of that port of 34% of chemicals, and a part of this is that's the early signs of this already enhanced competitiveness that we're being able to capitalize on.
Okay, well let's go to the audience. We have microphones, traveling microphones. We'll start right up front here, and if you could just give us your name and your affiliation.
Hi, Gabe Pellethy with U.S. Steel Corporation. My question is, Cal, you referenced a domestic energy policy. Where do the panelists feel that LNG exports kind of fits into that picture? Thank you.
Well, our industry as being one of the leading export industries, we generally embrace pretty much market-oriented policies there. There's no question whatsoever that the domestic economic benefits are going to be most advantaged by the converting of natural gas here in the United States. But we've also are well aware that market forces are probably going to result in some amount of natural gas being exported out of the United States, and we don't have a policy objecting to that. And we also, again, when you look at the global natural gas supplies that are out there, and where their proximity is to some of the greatest demand, be it Japan, Asia, or Europe, there's going to be other competitors out there that might have an advantage in terms of supplying those markets over time as well.
Okay, let's go all the way in the back row there.
Hello, Tracy Dove, Embassy of Switzerland. I have a general question for the panel. Based on Tom made a statement about the radiation, I recall a story about Nikola Tesla and Mark Twain actually sitting together one night marveling over this new thing called the X-ray machine. And they sat around all evening taking X-rays of each other and laughing and comparing the pictures and not knowing the radiation dangers of this new X-ray machine. Wouldn't you say that maybe we're having a Tesla-Twain moment here with this fracking technology?
No. No. Because it's not a new technology. I mean, it has been used, for decades to extract natural gas and oil. There's just been enhancements of the technology that have made it more efficient, that are allowing us to capitalize on it. And also, there's been enhancements in the technology and the practices of extracting it that have allowed us to ensure that we can have the protections in place which protect against groundwater contamination and manage a lot of those very serious vulnerabilities. And so I think that I have complete confidence that that the production side of the gas industry has the ability and are deploying the practices to ensure that they can extract it without harming the environment.
Anybody else want to comment?
I just reiterate what I've said in the past, right? This is something that needs to be watched, right? It just has to be watched. Prudence on either side would indicate that it should be watched. It needs to be monitored. Let's see what's going on. We have done fracking for many, many years. Some of the early oil technologies were really fracking anyway. But doing it on the scale that we're doing it and doing it how we're doing it now, it's somewhat different. So prudence says, let's watch, let's see. Hopefully, of course, for everybody, it doesn't have an environmental impact or not much of an environmental impact. But if it does, then we're going to have to do some hard thinking.
Okay, let's go all the way in the back corner there.
I'm John Yochelson, a friend of Tom. This is an out-of-area issue for me, so I hope you'll forgive me if this is a naive question. I'm wondering whether or not this renaissance could be viewed as as a real opportunity to raise revenues on U.S. manufacturing in the context of our fiscal situation, and whether the story of manufacturing that I knew when I was in this field in the 90s, which was we're disadvantaged by our tax policy in global competition, whether that story no longer holds in light of what you have suggested, and what if you could just play out what the implications are on the tax side.
Sure. So I'm not, as someone who's tried to stay out of Washington as much as possible and probably not been successful, I look at it what the cost differences are. So if we look at the cost difference to manufacture a similar good, an average manufacturing good in the U.S., we'll peg that at 100. In France, it's about 115, which is a massive difference in an industry that actually doesn't have high margins. In Germany, it's also about 115. And in Japan, it's 121. So 21% more expensive to manufacture a similar good in Japan than in the U.S. So we have a lot of competitive advantage here, which we need to use. The president has made statements about manufacturing tax rates, and his statements, at least before the election, I haven't heard anything since the election, his statements have been in a similar way, which is that he expects a lower tax rate for manufacturing rather than a higher tax rate for manufacturing. How that all plays out in our government, I'm not a Washington person, so I don't really know. But those are the statements that have been made.
I'd just say, just to elaborate, we did the study that we just released when we looked at really a snapshot of about 7 energy-intensive industries and how they benefit from natural gas, and is we also calculate what that would generate annually in terms of tax revenues, state, local, and federal. And our calculation was that was about $26 billion annually in new tax revenues that would be generated under existing policies. But that will not mitigate I think the interest in terms of a level playing field internationally with a territorial tax approach that the broader corporate world would certainly be interested in.
Okay, let's go up front here. Gil?
Gil Kaplan with...
Could you go to the microphone so our remote viewers
Thank
can know
you.
who you are?
I'm Gil Kaplan with King and Spalding and the Conference on the Renaissance of American Manufacturing. I'd like to ask sort of the opposite of, or the reverse of Tom's question. You know, this is great, obviously, to have a low-cost input that is so pervasive. And Tom asked, what could harm the future benefits of this? I'd ask, if you were in a position to do it, what policies would you propose that would leverage this to increase the benefits to the greatest extent in the fastest way? Is there anything the U.S. government should be doing or state governments should be doing to try to take the fullest advantage of this?
Well, state governments are doing a lot of things. I sat down with Governor Beshear of Kentucky about a month ago, as well as several other governors, and had a good conversation about it. When it comes to state governments, they are very motivated on economic development. I'm not worried about that at all. They are finding ways, not just on the energy side, but also on jobs training, which is a big issue for a lot of manufacturers, to be able to provide that as part of an economic development package. And so all these things are working, I think, at a reasonably good level at the state level. At the federal level, I think there's a big fear of promoting one state over the other. And I think that's something we need to change, because we should be promoting the United States. We are a very low-cost manufacturing nation relative to the rest of the developed world. And what we're seeing now is manufacturers from Europe and Japan coming to the U.S. at first to produce for United States consumption and thereby taking out all those transportation costs, but also to export from the United States, because we are 15% lower cost to manufacture than Germany, 15% cost lower than France, and 21% less cost than Japan. And so what I would love to see our federal government do is be the salespeople for the United States. If you're a big company, you can go out and do that yourself. If you're small companies, it's actually very hard. And so if we could just make that happen, not being dependent on any one state, but actually just saying, how do we sell the United States of America? Because it's a great place to manufacture. We have strong regulations that keep us safe, but we have a cost advantage that makes it very, very attractive.
If I can just maybe elaborate just on another issue. I agree with everything Hal said there, and this gets a little more granular, but I was in Louisiana the other day meeting with some of our companies there, and we have a partnership with the Louisiana Chemical Council down there. They had done a projection in terms of the number of tradespeople that they need by 2016 to really construct all these new facilities are lined up. And their projection was 34,000 tradespeople. These are welders, pipe fitters that they need, and they're not available right now. And I was in Ohio. You can't even hardly hire a welder in Ohio right now. And so there is a really pressing need, which I think government has a role to play to help train and develop the skills that are needed, not only at the higher levels, because we need more chemical engineers, obviously, but there's just a tremendous growing demand for some of these tradespeople that are high skilled, and these jobs are paying very, very well. And so that is, is something I think collectively through the state and the federal cooperation that really needs to be addressed more effectively than it has been to date.
Yeah, and we have a very significant demographic problem on that as well. So the average age in manufacturing, and the welders can go between manufacturing and oil and gas very smoothly. It's pretty much the same thing, as well as some of the other trades, but not many, but those are the ones that are important. The average age of a welder is 56 years old. Now, that's a problem. It doesn't take rocket scientists to work out the demographics issue. And one of the things that we need to do as a nation, if we want to have manufacturing, or for that matter, oil and gas, or we just import people from somewhere else, but if we want Americans to be doing these jobs, what we have to do is get very serious on training. We have a wonderful opportunity with the natural gas. We have a wonderful opportunity with the changing global economics. But we will fail in putting Americans to work if they don't get training. And so I've been working with different organizations, including the Clinton Global Initiative, to try to get a program together to start to do this. States are doing it as part of economic development, but as a nation we need to do this. Manufacturing is no longer basically back-breaking work. It's a lot more brain power than back-breaking work. And that's a big change. And what we've told our children is they should go to college. And I absolutely agree with that. And I'm glad my children have gone to college. I think that's the right thing. They both got liberal arts degrees, so they're not going to make much money. But they went to college. But what I think we need to do is provide opportunities where we provide well-rounded people, right? And I went to the Wharton Business School, and I argue I went to a trade school, right? I learned to trade for half my time, but I also went to the University of Pennsylvania, that is the parent of the Wharton Business School, and I got a good liberal arts degree. I don't know why we are not, as a nation, basically sending our kids to school. Some will go to pure liberal arts, some will go to this business program I have, but others should be going to one where they get a liberal arts education and they learn welding and they learn machining and they learn all these other things. These are great skills, and these are some of the very highest paying jobs in our nation for general workers. And with a demographic of a 56-year-old average population, it's almost got to be a lock, but we've taught our children in many ways not to do these things because that's just hard work. Well, welding is hard work. All these works are hard work. Actually, doing your jobs is also hard work. Work nowadays is hard. But these are very well-paying jobs that all these kids who've come out of school since 2008 who haven't been able to find jobs, if they got the training, could do. And the great part of it is those are all those educated liberal arts people who are actually pretty darn smart. And you actually want a smart welder because welding takes place at very high temperatures, and you don't want that in your factory or at your oil operations or in anything else you're doing with someone who doesn't really know what they're doing.
So that is a subject, by the way, that our program has addressed before, and we have a program in planning for the spring on this subject. Paula, right here in the second row.
Thank you. I'm Paula Stern, the Stern Group, and thank you for a very interesting discussion. I'd like to go back to Tom's point about the dominant role in policy that impacts on conservation, renewables, waste management, transportation, emission requirements, etc. In other words, back to the federal policy questions. And my overarching question is, if natural gas is going to give us such a great advantage, what are the economic incentives and what policies do we need to keep in place to assure that renewables still play the increasing role that it had played? And by that, everyone, when they think about renewables, thinks solar and wind. But I'm very involved and interested in waste to energy, which gets into the waste management as well. There are other renewables out there that have not even been encouraged by the Department of Energy, maybe DOD, but not DOE. So I'm interested in the overarching impact of that natural gas on that renewables policy.
So we took a look at what's happened in the last 5 to 7 years in terms of these changes and trajectories, and actually used the forecasts from the Energy Information Administration and kind of carved out how much of these very significant annual downward shifts in carbon dioxide emissions are caused by the economy, how much by policy, and how much by prices. Yeah. You look at that whole mix together, when you look out to 2020 over that period of time, these are big downward shifts. Only 6% of that downward shift is attributable to natural gas and the changes in price structure there. A lot more is going on. In terms of business as usual, there's, I guess, a question mark from a policy standpoint is how much do we care about carbon and this additional gap? How much do we care about energy security writ large? And that breaks down into a half a dozen different areas. And how much do we care about economic development that's going to be the kind that we really want, presumably something that's sustained? The business as usual shifts we've seen from gas so far have really helped engineer some positive changes in that direction, but there has to be more, and that doesn't look like it's necessarily going to happen all by itself in the marketplace. So what's the policy intervention? And it certainly appears that there are opportunities and needs for things that will incentivize further reductions in energy intensity, as well as further penetration of renewables and other low-emitting forms of energy. So to kind of cut to the chase, I think these things kind of start intersecting around some issues that are kind of headachy right now and may attract some congressional attention. And one of them is a clean energy standard, and then we're going to see some probably fairly intense dogfighting over EPA rules in this next year or two. And it really calls the question of our power sector and what we really want to do with that sector, what we want it to look like going forward, and in a very different world today than existed just a few years ago. So I think what natural gas does is it's helped reset that table. It's not the only thing that's reset it. We've gotten shrinking price differentials between new stuff that will accomplish the kind of objectives you're talking about and conventional stuff, and gas has played a big role there. But policy played a big role too, health regulations for coal, things like that. There's a new opportunity now to craft these longer-term policies that can get these things on the same page, but I think it's going to take things like standards that will address those longer-term structural needs. And it's not going to happen by itself. I think the other thing that we're going to continue to hear a lot about, but perhaps we'll get a little bit more granular, as you suggest, Cal, is this whole issue of energy security. What does that really mean if we're to put together a comprehensive energy security blueprint? I actually think the Senate is going to start thinking more deliberatively about that. I think the administration is too. I think we've got a clock ticking in the Middle East that's going to make this very salient, and I think starting to look more deeply at that in combination with some of these other issues is going to be a bit of a forcing thing. And then finally, the reality is when you look at what creates jobs on a pound-per-pound basis or BTU per BTU basis, the new stuff across the board is better than the conventional stuff. And so there's gold in them hills. What's changed today from a couple of years ago was to get to those new jobs a couple of years ago, you had to wade through a big price differential, and that was so high that the countervailing effect on the economy depressed it and washed those away. Today it's a different situation. That differential has shrunk, but the really highly leveraged returns from the whole range of renewables and low emitting plus demand reduction in comparison to conventionals make this a really attractive return on investment from jobs, which of course continues to be a major priority. So I think when you look at those things together, there certainly is an opportunity and a pathway for policy to try to address those through, a couple of really targeted things in Congress, and I would put at the top of that list a clean energy standard and things around that, a variety of things that will sort of coalesce around energy security. And I think that that's going to be attached to a conversation about money, because the days are gone when you can talk about policy without talking about moving money, and moving money is, of course, incredibly difficult. So I think that there is probably a lot that is going to bubble up in that arena going forward. I think there'll be a parallel conversation at the state and local level as well.
If I could just add, we had a session out in Aspen this summer with a small group of CEOs, and we talked about energy amongst other things. And the surprising thing was, even though they all know that natural gas, cheaper prices is a wind at our back, they're still looking very, very aggressively at conservation measures. Yes. And there's a long way to go. I mean, just LED lights apparently has some very, very big advantages. And for them, it's a question not only of sustainability, but they compete. The manufacturing sector is globally competed, and so they have to continually look for ways to reduce their costs. And conservation, as far as I could tell, was one of the biggest areas that they left to be tapped. So over here.
Bill Frymore with Stewart & Stewart. I wanted to, first of all, this is great to hear this American success story today. Thank you, Tom. But I wanted to just delve into the regionalism a little bit more, try to understand. We hear that fracking is such a big industry, and the Great Plains, North Dakota, whoever thought would have been the highest economic growth in the United States for the last few years. What, especially for Congressman Dooley, for the chemical industry, as you're citing new plants, do you look at kind of where the gas sourcing is and cite proximate to the sourcing? Is it state policies? Are there particularly noteworthy state policies that have encouraged siting? I mean, where has the growth been regionally in the investment in your industry? And other comments that folks might have on regional growth differentials and what it means for incomes in the country, income equality, those types of issues, please.
Well, the vast majority of the early investments in increased chemical manufacturing, and by that I mean the last few years, it's really been in the Gulf region, where they have the existing infrastructure in place, and where you have, there's basically been a lot of expansion of facilities in those areas to capitalize on the reduced prices of natural gas. But when you look to the future, when you look at the Marcellus shales and the Utica shales, and what's important for our industry is not just natural gas, it's natural gas that is wet, it's heavy in liquids. And both the Utica and the Marcellus look like they are very wet fields. And so that's where you hope to eventually see significant new investments. And we have one that is currently under review by Shell, which would be a major new cracker that would be outside of Pittsburgh. They haven't made the final decision, but they are in the midst of their feasibility study, which would be the first cracker really built up in that region. And that creates almost a domino effect once you get one, that you'd see the ancillary businesses that would develop. And then the state and federal policies there, that it's not any really all that much different than what you see for competing for other sectors. It's a set of tax benefits, permitting processes that are important. But for our industry too is that the transportation, and that's where again that the barge, rail, Great Lakes proximity is very important if you're in your position where we are in the value chain.
Let's go to the front row here.
Walt Galvin from Emerson Electric. Not being that specific with the energy industry, but if you look at our aging natural gas distribution system and the growth that you indicated was occurring in production in natural gas, that currently our gas lines in the United States do leak, and there's losses as you go through distribution. And the concern over cybersecurity, with this growth, is that also being served? Because we have certain issues with the security over our natural gas and electricity distribution systems.
You know, I have a very good friend, Dave McCurdy, that runs the American Gas Association, and I will forward your question to him. I can't respond to it, really, but it is something that's obviously important. You got to have the integrity of the infrastructure, and yeah.
Okay, Michael.
Michael Schulman. This question is for all of you, but most, I guess, for Mr. Serkin. The last 30 years of reality and headlines, you have the United States doing more and more value-added manufacturing as opposed to semi-finished goods or core industrial goods now based on energy prices and the core industrial facilities that are being built. Combine that with reduced labor costs, which have come about the last 5 or 10 years, and an American policy where we need a lot of manufacturing jobs as opposed to just the precision manufacturing jobs. Do you see as part of the renaissance of simpler manufacturing, of less precision manufacturing, of more worker-intensive manufacturing, as semi-finished goods become less expensive to buy and are more proximate in terms of procuring them in the United States? Just one example, I was at Trek Bicycles at their carbon fiber plant. They do aluminum in Taiwan and in northern Germany, but one of the issues is they can't get the aluminum they want. It's not even a matter of cost. So if more smelters were available, theoretically, would they do something? Do you see that happening as going backward on the precision trail and creating more jobs that way?
Yeah, I see it more from a supply chain perspective, but it's the same outcome, which is as we start to manufacture more, right, that will bring a lot of downstream supply chain, similar to the way if you looked at what Toyota did to bring their manufacturing to the United States. First they brought a plant, and then the suppliers followed. And that's what we're seeing now. So the precision stuff will be in that supply chain. The non-precision aspects of it will be in that supply chain. Some things won't be made in the United States. A lot of things will be made in the United States. And we're now seeing supply chains starting to form that are using U.S. as part of the non-precision supply base for companies that are in Europe. And so we see that taking place. And so we're going to see a wide range of jobs coming back. I'm not sure that necessarily means labor intensive, right? Because at the same time, the cost of automation has dropped dramatically. A PLC, is about the 10th of the cost as it was 20 years ago, right? The basic standard that you need in a manufacturing facility. And that's the digital revolution is making this happen, and Moore's Law and all the other wonderful things. So we're getting that as an advantage. So what we're seeing is a lot more automation, which means, if a company, for example, had 100 jobs in the U.S. and it shipped them to China, it would probably have 300 Chinese workers or 400 Chinese workers doing the same jobs. And in 2001, that was a great deal. Today, that's not turning out to be such a great deal. But when you bring it back, you might only bring back 75 jobs. Now, those 75 jobs that we would have never had if it wasn't for the automation, but there's 75 jobs that come back. And I think that's the kind of thing we're going to start to see. And we are seeing where companies are making those decisions. But automation is going to play a role because this is all about the underlying economics. I think we'll see increases in manufacturing jobs and recognize that we've seen massive decreases for the last 40 years, right? We have less than half the manufacturing workers, if you look at actual manufacturing workers, not people who are sitting in buildings that have manufacturing, than we had. And we produce, by the way, over the last 40 years, we produce 2.5 times as much with 30% less labor. Right now, if you talk about American ingenuity, right, that's American ingenuity, and that's why we still have manufacturing in this country. When it was 58 cents an hour in China in 2001, because American ingenuity's won out, and I think we're seeing that, and we're seeing, of course, Chinese wages rising and all these other changes, and I think that's affecting it all, and that's what's driving companies coming back to the United States. It's not about patriotism, although you can charge a premium if you put a made in U.S. label on things, but it's not patriotism, it's just money. We are in a capitalistic society, and that's how this works. And the wind that was basically blowing very strongly in our faces is now starting to turn, and it's really becoming at our backs. Add the energy advantage to it, and it becomes an incredibly wonderful thing.
Okay, we got time for one more. Let's go on this side, this second row.
Yeah, Chris Brodowski from Manufacturers Alliance for Productivity and Innovation. I'd like to round out that answer and come back also to Tom's earlier question about exports. It's not only the issue of the cost of energy. If you break down the total cost of manufacturing into its unit cost, let's say unit material costs, unit capital costs, or unit labor costs, and I have done that for various process industries and durable goods for Europe and the United States, and you look at the dynamic change over time, then what I have found out is just what Calvin has mentioned, I think, is that over time, these costs have come down regularly and over time in all of these components in favor of the United States. So in terms of exports, if we see any pickup right now, it's probably due to all of these accumulated advantages over time. And if these material costs keep coming down, that would be an additional story going forward. So that's definitely something that we have seen over time, and it's in an accumulated basis.
Okay. Well, this has been an incredibly informative discussion. I want to thank each of the panelists for joining us here today. I want to thank you for being a good audience, and happy holidays to everyone.